behind by this government that need to be filled, and who is expected to step up? The already underfunded nonprofits, the very backbones of so many communities. As far as I've heard from various family resource centers and an organization representing 26 family resource centers, none of their funding has been restored. That includes Cape Breton Family Resource Center, serving Inverness, Richmond, Victoria counties, and Cape Breton. Kids First Association, serving Pictou, Antigonish, Guysborough counties. The South Shore Family Resource Association, serving Digby, Lunenburg, Queens, and Shelburne. Maggie's Place, that was previously mentioned by my colleague representing Cumberland North. And Fairview-Clayton Park's very own Nova Village, serving so much of HRM. And so I'm going to go into the letter that was first submitted by the Nova Scotia Association of Family Resource Programs when this budget initially came out. Dear Premier, on behalf of the board of the Nova Scotia Association of Family Resource Centers, I am writing from a place of concern for the family resource centers sector and the families it serves with regards to the recent broad-based funding cuts announced by the province of Nova Scotia. The association represents 25 individual family resource centers with a mission to act as a strong leader for children, youth, families, and communities across Nova Scotia. For over 30 years, the mission of the sector has been to support families' health and well-being for those with the least access to available resources. As these families have minimal resources, the vast majority of programs and services are offered at no cost. FRPs, or Family Resource Programs, are an integral part of a continuum of support for families in Nova Scotia. On January 26, 2026, the Nova Scotia Association of Family Resource Programs wrote the Premier and Minister to express great concerns regarding current pressures that family resource programs are facing and the urgent need for additional investments to maintain their vital community hubs. And so, getting away from the letter for just a sec to give some context, these associations have been running on a budget or funding that has not been adjusted since 2021. However, at the same time, they've been seeing service users increase by 25% and sometimes up to 100% in some areas. So imagine asking a business to operate like that. You suddenly have 25%, 50%, 100%, so a doubling of the demand needed for your business, but you have to do it using the same amount of money. Furthermore, actually, if you take inflation into consideration, you're asking them to do it with less money. That business would go bankrupt. So going back to the letter, wait lists, increased participant numbers, staff retention, and operational stresses are all forcing painful decisions on FRPs as they work within the grant that has not increased since 2021. Additionally, new government programs, duplicating programs and services traditionally under the Family Resource Program mandates have been introduced without consultation with the sector. In essence, family resource programs are expected to do more with less while maintaining current levels of operation. February 2nd, 2026, in a response letter written on behalf of the Premier and the Department of Opportunities and Social Development, noted, and I quote, "The impact of the services provided by family resource centers and the vital role they play in addressing the well-being needs of children and families." The response, however, ended by indicating that there will be no additional investments provided at this time. The well-being needs of Nova Scotian children and families is considerable. In 2023, 38% of children in Nova Scotia were living in food-insecure households, with over 40,000 children in Nova Scotia living in households in the lowest per cap. Sorry, let me go back and repeat that. 40,000 children in Nova Scotia living in households below the low-income threshold. Nova Scotia has ranked second worst in all provinces and territories in reducing child poverty since 1989. And let's not forget that Nova Scotia also has the highest rate of child poverty in all of Atlantic Canada. The Nova Scotia Office of Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives 2025 report card states that Nova Scotia has made less progress than other provinces in addressing poverty rates. This lack of progress is because Nova Scotia has had the lowest per capita spending in the country on social protections in 2023 and 2024. Social protections being the systemic intervention intended to relieve households and individuals of the burden of a defined set of social risks. Nova Scotia is, quote, starting at a base where it has not been investing in the ways that other provinces have, end quote. Late Tuesday afternoon, family resource centers across Nova Scotia received notification that they would be impacted by significant funding cuts and now await further detail on these cuts. The process thus far employed to make these cuts included no input from the sector and has been communicated in a confused and indifferent manner. And I will also say, because I was copied on those emails, initially the first notice that went out to the family resource centers said that their funding is going to be $5,000. So the initial scare they got was that their funding is going from $500,000 to $5,000. And it turns out it was an error, leaving all of those organizations to scramble, wondering, what are we going to do? How are we going to stay open? And it wasn't until many of them reached out to the department that the department realized that nobody was doing any proofreading before these letters went out. For a department that has a $1.8 billion budget, I think we can do better than that. Family resource programs have been operating in partnership with the government for over 30 years, showing year after year positive outcome data. And so in my experience working with United Way was or is an amazing organization, but also that funds a lot of organizations in Nova Scotia. And I've learned that part of being a funder means that you require reports coming in at the end of every year. I also learned that the Department of Opportunities and Social Development requires the same thing. That's the normal, no problem. However, what that also tells me is that at the same time that the department was getting yearly reports from these organizations talking about how amazing their impact is and how much the need for their services have grown, nothing happened to increase their funding since 2021. And so my question is, where are those reports going? Who's actually reviewing them? And how are they being used to inform the decisions being made by the department when it comes to funding these programs? These cuts will affect frontline staff and result in reduced services in a sector already under significant pressure to keep up with the demands. And so while there may not be cuts in frontline staff, or that's what we hear with government staff, but the organizations that are doing the heavy lifting to ensure that Nova Scotians can at the very least survive, but in many cases they help them thrive, they are going to have to figure out what they're doing with frontline staff and how that's going to impact the services that they're providing. Family resource programs create conditions which allow families to engage, participate, and thrive in the face of often difficult situations, With less, it will mean doing less, leaving many families to fall through the cracks, resulting in more pressure on other government systems. And that was signed by Mitch McNutt, the Nova Scotia Association of Family Resource Programs Executive Director, I believe. So that, going to table that. So going back to where I was. So again, rather than listening to their calls for additional support to ensure that our most vulnerable citizens are being supported when they go and seek support from these organizations, the funding has remained exactly the same. Rather than, or in any other sector, if a business experiences that much of an increase in service users while running on a reduced budget, they would go bankrupt, particularly when the cost of everything under the sun is rising. So, you know, I've talked about family resource centers several times here before, and I know for a fact that the way that the family resource centers are spread out across the province, there's at least one family resource center servicing every riding that is represented here. And so, you know, we've heard from the Premier that the rolling back of these cuts is because members had gone back home over the weekend and spoke to their constituents. And so I wonder what the government members heard from family resource centers servicing their areas. And what about the mobile food